Man, you don't know anything about my dancing skills. Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate everybody stopping by, taking a look at my video here. So I have the round 7, game 2 between Magnus Carlsen and Wesley. So, you know, world champion classical versus world Fisher random champion. So it is an epic battle. They've been struggling for the past 2 days with each other. It's such a close call between the two of them. It's really hard to call it. But for all of my people in the Philippines, magandang umaga. Kumusta na? Mabuhay, ingat lagi. Masaya kong makikinig muli. Mabuting pagbati. Appreciate you guys very much for everything. Almasal tayo. It's 3:20 in the morning, so I'm trying to get this video down a little earlier. For anybody who does speak Norwegian, God Morgan, hello, and tack. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by and taking a look at my video. But if you guys are ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look and see what we got for this game. All right, so we got E4. We got C5. Knight comes to F3. Knight to C6. As I say, you know, with the open positions, as far as like, you know, when you have like the E5 situation coming after E4, you know, you're almost always going to see this type of piece movement. You know, this is going to be the most common, you know, way to open the Sicilian defense. So we see bishop to B5. So now we have the Sicilian Rosalimo attack. We got E5, just trying to close the position as much as possible. We have castles, bishop to D6. This is a move, but it's a much lesser played move. Usually you're going to see knight to F6, bishop to E7. You're not going to block your D pawn. So it's not the usual way to go about doing it, but it's possible. You know, Magnus Carlsen, Magnus Carlsen is thinking about kind of like backing the bishop up and, you know, trying to be influential on this diagonal, which, you know, might be a possibility coming up. We got C3 by white, A6. We have bishop back to A4. We have B5, and this is very normal expansion for black in the Sicilian. Almost always you're going to see an A6 B5 situation coming up because you do have the support of the C5 pawn. So bishop comes back to B3. We have knight G to E7, and then we have D4, and D4 is the novelty of the game. It's kind of crazy because D4 is like by far the most natural move in the position. You've already prepared it with C3. So pushing D4 is like kind of a no-brainer. So it's kind of interesting how this is a novelty in this type of a position. We do see C4. Bishop comes to C2. We have knight to G6, and then we have pawn takes E5. And so we see bishop backing up to E7. Now, it's not a problem taking on E5 with the bishop, but you know, you do kind of start getting some tempos as white. You know, the bishop will take, the knight will take, you'll get the knight taken back, probably this knight taken back, but you'll be pushing F4. And you'll just be getting a lot of tempos and stuff by white. So that's kind of something that was bothering the chess engine. So we got bishop back to E7. We have knight to D4. We have knight G takes E5. We have F4. So you kind of get them anyway, but just not quite maybe as serious as, you know, the other situation. Knight comes back to G6. We see knight takes C6, pawn takes C6, and then we see queen to H5. And as you guys can see, I mean, white's definitely going on the attack. Their position is considerably better than black's. But, you know, so, you know, they're doing their thing up here. So queen comes to B6 with check, taking advantage of the open, the diagonal to the king after the F4 push. That's why you always have to be careful when you push F3, F4 situations, because this diagonal can become very weak. So be careful with that. So we have queen to C5, offering a trade of queens, but it's not really beneficial for white to trade queens. You know, black has done so many different movements. Their king is not in the safety. So they really want to focus on getting their development going. So, you know, you can push E5, F5, or what we saw in the game was queen to F3. So, you know, this wasn't a situation where you want to trade pieces. Because, I mean, especially like if you were to trade with the queen, you know, you pop the queen over here, taking C5, but then you'll be taken back with the bishop. And as you guys can see, it kind of messes with your development a little bit as white. Because, you know, you can't just naturally develop this bishop over here to E3. You got to go knight B to D2. You're kind of blocking this bishop as far as this pawn goes. It's not really convenient to put the knight here. So, you know, you kind of gave yourself a little bit of problems by trading. So every time you come up on a situation where a trade is available, you always kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of that situation, because not every single situation is exactly the same. But so we see castles by black. We have bishop to E3. Now, so as you guys can see, this is a much better plan for white. because they do start getting their development rolling. The queen comes to d6, but something I actually don't agree with what Wesley so does is goes queen to h5. Now, it was much actually better to start just continuing pushing the development of your pieces. You've already gained the tempo with bishop to e3, so why not go knight to d2? You know, you're able to now swing the rook over to d1. You have the possibility of starting to push these pawns. So, you know, it's instead of touching the queen again, you know, just force development. So that's something I can tell you guys. When you're playing games, it's really, really tempting sometimes to like start attacking and, you know, hitting the piece, you know, moving the piece multiple times. But, you know, a lot of times after you've kind of, you know, your attack has fizzled out, you realize that you're in a bad position because your pieces aren't out. So, you know, force development as much as humanly possible. So we do see c5 by black, just trying to restrict this bishop as much as possible. And also, no, not that. And also, you know, free up this bishop to come on to b7. So we see knight to d2 now. So as you can see, Wesley So is starting to get his pieces out now. So we got bishop to b7, and then we see e5. And we back queen up to c7. Of course, we're not going to go queen to c6 and threaten checkmate because we're going to be looking at bishop to e4. So don't do that. So after queen comes to c7, we do see knight to f3. And then we see h6. You know, Magnus Carlsen is a little bit fearful of knight coming to g5. So in this actual position, you have pretty much anything you can do. You know, there really isn't a wrong move here for white. What we do see in the game is rook a to e1, but if we back up, I mean, you can even capture here with the bishop. It's not quite as strong, but after the pawn takes, the queen takes, you see that you are up an entire pawn, so you have won some material. Also here, e6 is possible, just trying to undermine the protection of this knight. You know, queen coming down to g4 is possible. You know, there's just pretty much like no wrong way to go, you know, in this position. So like I said, we do see rook a to e1. The queen comes to c6. Why not threaten, you know, why not pin this knight down and, you know, kind of threaten some mate situations? So e6 does come. We see knight down to h4. And then we do the move that is very possible in the position is actually going knight taking h4. Not that, knight taking h4. But we do see the intermezzo, pawn takes f7. Then we see rook takes f7. We've reached a point in the game. If you want to go ahead and stop the video and guess pretty much the strongest move in the position for white, go ahead and do so real quick. Okay, cool. So for those of you that noticed, if you were to take the rook here, it would force the king down, or you would just lose a rook. And then you can also check here on e5. You would be absolutely correct. And this actually is what Wesley So plays in the game. He takes on f7 with the queen. And of course, you know, the king isn't obligated to take back, but you're going to be, you know, horribly down material if you do not take the queen, if you move the king over and something like that. So the king does take back. We see knight to e5 with check. King comes to f8. And then we see knight taking c6, bishop taking c6, and then we see rook to e2. You know, we're just in time to make sure that we don't have any checks here, because that would be really dangerous. So we do see rook to e8. Bishop comes down to c1. Yeah. And so we see rook over to c8. We have king to g1. Bishop comes to f6. We have f5. b4. Bishop comes to d2. We see rook to d8. We see bishop down to e1, giving a nice little attack on this knight, making it a little bit uncomfortable and actually being grim on the rim. So we see b3, pawn takes b3, pawn takes b3, then we see bishop takes b3, and this really just gives away a pawn. This puts the bishop on a really nice diagonal, you know, everything is going pretty well for white. So we see bishop to b5, and it kind of looks like you're going to lose a rook, but you do have the saving move c4, but unfortunately this does kind of close your bishop off a little bit, so now you have to redirect it. So the bishop comes back to c6. We see rook to f4. We have rook to d4. Rook takes d4. Bishop takes d4. We have bishop to f2. And we have knight takes f5. And then we have bishop to c2. And it is in this position that Magnus Carlsen does resign the game. And pretty much, you know, just a possible variation that might come from this. This might have been something that Magnus had calculated in his head. The best possible move in the position is knight to e7. After knight to e7, you would take on d4 with the bishop. The pawn would take on d4. You'd see rook to e6. And this is X-raying through this bishop to try to get this pawn, because the bishop doesn't have the ability to go down. to B5 to protect. So we're going to be pushing A5, and then after bishop comes to E4, really trying to trade the bishops off. If you avoid the trade and go back to E8, you do see C5, and as you guys see, these pieces are, you know, doing really good at being able to try to usher this pawn to the touchdown zone, or the end zone, however you want to say it. So it is in lieu of this that Magnus Carlsen does resign the game. So he does get this, Wesley So does get this win, so he keeps it neck and neck. So they're still neck and neck at the moment. So it's kind of nail biting for everybody that's watching. But appreciate you guys very much. For my people that are from the Philippines, I'm going to try to get all of these good mornings. I think I'm doing a lot better with them now. So I have Maayong Buntag, Mayad na Agahan, Naibag na Bigat, Masentos ya Kabusan, Marhe na Aga, Buenos Dias, Maayong Aga. I have Kapian, Kapa nu Dios, and I have Mapia na Uma. I said those in reverse because I think that one comes first. And then the other one, Mayap Abak. So yeah, Mapia na Uma and Kapia Capo nu Dios was flipped, but I'm still getting them. I'm getting them in pretty good order. So I'll be adding another one probably in the next day or two. So bear with me, but I appreciate you guys stopping by, and I will see you guys next time. All right.